I'm standing in my brother's $12 million penthouse, looking out over the glittering Chicago skyline. But I'm not here as a guest. And I'm certainly not here the way I was 6 months ago when he dragged my suitcase across his imported marble floor and threw me out into a blizzard at 2 in the morning. I'm here as the legal owner of the land beneath every single one of these 50 stories of glass and steel. In my hand, I'm holding a key, not to this penthouse, to a room my brother doesn't even know exists. A climate-controlled vault hidden in the basement of what he thought was a worthless, rotting factory. The room where my father planned all of this 10 years ago. The room where I found the truth.
But before I tell you about that room, before I explain how a commercial property appraiser with $500 in her bank account brought down a $340 million real estate empire, I need to tell you about the night I thought I'd lost everything. The night my brother looked me in the eye and told me I was nothing. My name is Ariana Hudson. I'm 33 years old and I work as a commercial property appraiser in Chicago. If you're listening from somewhere far away, drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this has traveled. And please, stay with me until the end. It was 2 weeks after we buried my father. I was still wearing the same black dress from his funeral when my brother kicked my suitcase across his foyer. The chapel was packed with people who'd never actually met Trenton Hudson. Real estate developers, hedge fund managers, the kind of men who only show up to funerals if there's networking potential in the reception line. They shook my hand with practiced sympathy, their eyes already scanning the room for someone more important. My brother Brandon stood at the front, accepting condolences like a politician at a fundraiser. 6'2", custom Tom Ford suit, the kind of confident posture that comes from never being told no. His wife Vanessa was beside him in head-to-toe Chanel, her hand resting on his arm, diamonds catching the light from the stained glass windows. I stood alone in the back corner, wearing a dress I'd bought at Target 3 years ago for my mother's funeral. That's right. We'd buried my mother just 3 weeks earlier. Pancreatic cancer. It took her fast, 6 months from diagnosis to the end. And now, barely enough time to process that loss, we were burying my father too. Heart attack, the doctor said. The stress of losing Mom had been too much. I spent the last 6 years taking care of them. Every 3 in the morning medication dose. Every dialysis appointment. Every hospital vigil while Brandon was too busy with his hedge fund to visit. The funeral director asked if anyone wanted to say a few words. Brandon stepped up immediately, delivering a polished eulogy about continuing Dad's legacy of excellence. He didn't mention that he'd visited exactly twice during Dad's final year, both times to ask for a loan. When the service ended, I noticed something odd. Gerald Whitmore wasn't there. Mr. Whitmore had been our family attorney for 30 years. He'd drafted every contract, every will, every trust document my parents had ever signed. He should have been in the front row. Instead, his seat was empty. I asked the funeral director if he'd sent flowers, a card, anything. Nothing. Probably retired, Brandon said when I mentioned it later. Dad told me Whitmore had health issues. But something about it felt wrong. Mr. Whitmore had been at Mom's funeral just 3 weeks ago. He'd looked fine. Shaken, yes, but healthy. I pushed the thought aside. Grief does strange things to your mind. You start seeing patterns that aren't there. 3 days later, we met at the law offices of Caldwell and Associates. Not Mr. Whitmore's familiar wood-paneled office downtown. A sleek, modern conference room on the 40th floor of a glass tower. Everything chrome and intimidation. Richard Caldwell was younger than I expected. Mid-40s, expensive suit, the kind of smile that never reaches the eyes. He laid out the documents with the efficiency of a man who'd done this 1,000 times. "Let's get straight to it," he said, opening the leather portfolio. Trenton Hudson's last will and testament, executed 6 months ago, witnessed and notarized. 6 months ago. Right around the time Mom got her diagnosis. Caldwell read through the standard legal language, then got to the distribution of assets. To my son, Brandon Michael Hudson, the penthouse residence at 875 North Michigan Avenue, valued at approximately $12 million, plus all liquid assets held in trust estimated at $8 million, plus 51% controlling shares in Summit Ridge Capital. Brandon nodded, like he'd already known, like it had been decided long ago. And to my daughter, Ariana Elizabeth Hudson, Caldwell paused, flipped the page, continued in a slightly faster voice, like he wanted to get through it quickly. The commercial property located at 1847 South Industrial Boulevard, including all structures and improvements, together with any outstanding debts, liens, or tax obligations associated with said property. Silence. Brandon cleared his throat. That's the old textile factory, right? The one on the south side? Correct, Caldwell said. I stared at the document. My father had left me a condemned warehouse in one of the most dangerous neighborhoods in Chicago. The same building he had always told me was more trouble than it's worth. The same property that had been sitting vacant for decades, bleeding property taxes. Are there any liquid assets for Ariana? I heard myself ask. Caldwell shook his head. The factory is the sole bequest. As I mentioned, it comes with approximately $400,000 in delinquent property taxes and several municipal code violations. Brandon leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. Dad always knew who could handle what. A commercial property empire requires someone with financial acumen. He looked at me with something close to pity. I'm sure you can sell the factory, Ariana. Get enough to put a down payment on a small condo somewhere. Naperville, maybe? Somewhere that fits your budget. Vanessa reached over and patted my hand. Her wedding ring, a rock the size of a marble, caught the light. We won't let you be homeless, sweetie. You can stay in that penthouse guest room for a few more weeks while you figure things out. A few more weeks. The room I'd been living in for 6 years, so I could be there when Dad needed his medication at 3 a.m. The room where I'd cried myself to sleep after Mom's diagnosis. The room that apparently now belonged to my brother. I signed the acknowledgement form without reading it. Caldwell slid the factory deed across the table. The paper was thick, official, stamped with the Cook County seal. Property identification number 14-2-8-402-019. I folded it and put it in my purse next to my phone and the last $20 in my wallet. As we left, I turned back to Caldwell. Why didn't Gerald Whitmore handle this? His smile tightened. Mr. Whitmore retired suddenly. Health concerns. Your brother was kind enough to recommend our firm to handle the estate. Brandon was already in the elevator checking his phone. He hadn't heard the question. But I'd seen the flicker in Caldwell's eyes when I mentioned Whitmore's name. Something was wrong. I just didn't know what yet. The call came at 1:47 in the morning 2 weeks later. I was asleep in the guest room, dreaming about my father. In the dream, he was trying to tell me something important, but I couldn't hear him over the wind. My phone buzzed. Brandon's name on the screen. Come to the living room. Now. I pulled on my robe and walked down the hallway, my bare feet silent on the heated marble floors. The penthouse was dark except for the floor-to-ceiling windows, Chicago glittering 60 stories below. Brandon was waiting in the living room, standing near the windows in a silk robe holding a glass of scotch. Vanessa sat on the white leather sofa, her legs crossed, examining her nails. My suitcase was on the floor between us. We need to talk about your living situation, Brandon said. I pulled my robe tighter. It's almost 2 a.m. Vanessa and I have been discussing the space. We're converting the guest room into a private Pilates studio. We have VIP clients flying in from Dubai next week, and she needs somewhere to train them. I looked at Vanessa. She smiled, took a sip of wine. You want me to move out? I said. We want you to move forward, Brandon corrected. You're 33 years old, Ariana. Living in your parents' guest room is, well, it's tragic. You need to build your own life. I lived here to take care of Mom and Dad, and they're gone now. His voice was flat, clinical. Time to move on. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Can I have a few weeks to find? Tonight, Vanessa interrupted. We already called the cleaning service. They're coming at 6 to start the renovation. We can't have them working around your things. She said things, the way you'd say garbage. Brandon walked to the bar, poured himself another scotch. Look, I'm not heartless. Dad left you that factory. Go check it out. Maybe you can fix it up, flip it, make a little money. Enough for a studio apartment somewhere. Near the airport, probably. Something that fits your budget. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a heavy brass keyring. Rusted, ancient, the kind of keys that belonged in a museum. He tossed them at me. They hit my chest and fell to the floor. There you go, he said. Your inheritance. An abandoned building full of asbestos and back taxes. Try not to get mugged when you go visit it. Vanessa laughed. Actually laughed. Maybe she can appraise the graffiti. I bent down and picked up the keys. They were cold and heavy in my palm. I looked at my brother. Really looked at him. at the man who used to build blanket forts with me when we were kids, the man who'd promised to always protect me after our first day of school. "I'll be out in 15 minutes, I said quietly. Brandon checked his Rolex. Clock's ticking. I went back to the guest room and packed everything I owned into one suitcase. It didn't take long. 6 years of caregiving doesn't leave much time for shopping. When I rolled my suitcase back into the living room, Vanessa was already measuring the space with a tape measure, planning her Pilates studio. I stopped at the door, looked back one more time at the penthouse I'd called home, at the floor-to-ceiling windows, at the crystal chandelier, at my brother, who was scrolling through his phone, already bored. "Enjoy the view while it lasts," I said. He didn't even look up. The elevator ride down 60 floors was the longest of my life. When the doors opened to the lobby, the winter storm hit me like a wall. The doorman flagged down a taxi, looking at me with concern. "Where to, miss?" the driver asked. I pulled out the factory deed, read the address in the dim light of the cab. 1847 South Industrial Boulevard. The driver turned around in his seat. "Lady, that's the south side. At 2 in the morning. You sure about this?" I handed him a $50 bill, the last of my cash. "Drive." The factory looked exactly like my brother had described it. A nightmare. The cab's headlights illuminated a massive brick structure behind a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. Graffiti covered every surface. Windows were either shattered or boarded up with rotting plywood. The roof sagged in the middle under the weight of snow. The driver kept the engine running. "I can take you to a motel. There's a decent one near O'Hare, not too expensive. I'll be fine." I stepped out into the storm. Snow stung my face. The cab's taillights disappeared into the darkness, leaving me alone. I stood on the broken sidewalk, looking up at what my father had left me. Anyone else would have seen a liability, a condemned building bleeding money. But I wasn't anyone else. I was a commercial property appraiser. I'd spent 10 years of my life learning to see past the cosmetic damage, to examine the bones of a building. I walked along the fence line, shining my phone's flashlight at the foundation. And that's when I saw it. The columns supporting this rotting textile factory weren't standard steel beams. They were massive industrial-grade reinforced concrete pillars, the kind used to anchor skyscrapers, the kind that cost 10 times more than what a simple 2-story factory would ever need. I knelt down in the snow, brushing dirt away from the base of one column, ran my gloved hand over the surface. This foundation was over-engineered to an absurd degree. It could support 50 stories of dead weight, easy. My father didn't make mistakes with real estate. Every property he'd ever purchased had a purpose. I found a side door where the lock had been broken off years ago, pushed my way inside, the metal hinges screaming. The main floor was exactly what I'd expected. Debris, broken glass, the smell of damp concrete and decay. But I wasn't interested in the main floor. I was looking for the basement. The freight elevator shaft was blocked, but I found concrete stairs leading down. I descended carefully, my phone's light cutting through absolute darkness. The basement was empty except for some rotting wooden pallets and water stains. I walked the perimeter, tapping my knuckles against the walls. Solid brick, solid brick, solid brick. Then, in the far corner near the old boiler room, hollow. I ran my hands along the brickwork and felt it, a seam where the mortar was actually painted caulk. I pressed my weight against the section. The panel shifted inward with a mechanical click. I pushed harder. A hidden door swung open, revealing a narrow corridor. At the end of the corridor was a heavy steel door, bank vault grade, and next to the handle, a digital biometric scanner. The red standby light was glowing, which meant it had power, active power, in a building that had been abandoned for decades. My hand was shaking as I pressed my thumb against the glass scanner. It beeped. Green light. A series of heavy deadbolts retracted with a satisfying thud. I pulled the door open and stepped inside. The air changed immediately. Warm, dry, climate-controlled. Motion sensors triggered overhead LED lights, illuminating a perfectly preserved executive office. Leather chairs, mahogany desk, filing cabinets lining the walls. On the center of the desk, illuminated by a small brass reading lamp, sat a single thick leather folder, embossed in gold lettering, "For Ariana only." My legs almost gave out. I walked to the desk, hand trembling, and opened the folder. Inside, a stack of legal documents and a handwritten letter in my father's precise script. The first document was a certificate of incorporation for Hudson Ground Holdings, LLC, and the second was a ground lease agreement. I scanned the legal language, my professional training kicking in despite my shock. Hudson Ground Holdings, LC, owned Lot 402. I pulled up the city zoning map on my phone, cross-referenced the lot number. My vision blurred. Lot 402 was the exact parcel of land sitting directly underneath the $12 million luxury tower my brother had just kicked me out of. Brandon owned the building. I owned the ground it stood on, and according to the contract in my hands, the 99-year ground lease was set to expire in exactly 6 months. I sank into the leather chair, staring at the documents spread across the mahogany desk. My father hadn't abandoned me. He'd left me the only weapon that could destroy my brother's empire, and Brandon had no idea it existed. I spent the rest of that night in the vault reading every document in the filing cabinets: birth certificates, property deeds, corporate formation papers, tax returns going back decades. My father had kept meticulous records of everything, organized by year in color-coded folders. But one folder bothered me. It was labeled Lot 402, Acquisition, and dated 2014. I pulled it out, spread the contents across the desk. The first document was a purchase agreement. Hudson Ground Holdings, LLC, had acquired the ground lease rights for Lot 402 on March 15, 2014. Purchase price, $2.3 million, paid in full, cash transaction. 2014, 10 years ago. I sat back in the leather chair, my mind racing. The original ground lease had been signed 99 years ago, back in 1926, when developers first broke ground on that downtown block. But my father hadn't inherited this lease from some distant relative. He hadn't stumbled onto it by accident. He had deliberately purchased it, a decade ago, for over $2 million in cash. I pulled out my phone, opened my email, and searched for anything from 2014. Found a thread from March of that year. My father had emailed me about a theoretical zoning question for a property he was considering. He'd asked me to review the municipal codes for high-rise residential construction on pre-existing commercial lots. At the time, I thought he was just being curious, keeping his mind sharp after retirement. But he hadn't been curious. He'd been planning. I opened my laptop, the one luxury I'd allowed myself during those 6 years of caregiving, and logged into the Cook County Property Database. Searched for the acquisition history of Summit Tower, the luxury high-rise where Brandon's penthouse sat. The tower had been purchased by Summit Ridge Capital in 2016, 2 years after my father bought the ground lease. My hands started shaking. I pulled up Brandon's hedge fund website, found the press release announcing the tower acquisition, dated June 2016. The article included a quote from my brother. This represents Summit Ridge Capital's commitment to luxury residential development in Chicago's most prestigious corridor. I did the math. June 2016. Brandon was 28 years old. He'd only founded his hedge fund 3 years earlier, in 2013. How does a 28-year-old fund manager afford a $340 million building? I searched deeper, found the financing documents in the public records. Brandon had leveraged everything. The purchase was a complex web of commercial mortgages, investor capital, and personal guarantees. The kind of deal that works perfectly as long as property values keep rising. The kind of deal that collapses instantly if there's a title defect. I opened the ground lease agreement again, searching for the fine print. And there it was, page 47, the clause that changed everything. Upon expiration of the ground lease term, all improvements made to the property, including but not limited to structures, utilities, and permanent fixtures, shall revert to the landowner unless a renewal agreement is executed no less than 12 months prior to expiration date. The lease expired in 6 months. 12 months had already passed, which meant legally Brandon couldn't renew it even if he wanted to. The tower would revert to me, all 50 stories, every luxury condo, every marble countertop, every imported Italian fixture. I leaned back, staring at the climate-controlled ceiling. My father had done this on purpose. He'd bought the ground lease in 2014, 2 years before Brandon purchased the tower. Had he somehow known? Had Brandon told him about his plans? Had my father seen this coming and positioned me, to be holding all the cards? A cold realization washed over me. This wasn't a gift. This was a test. And somehow, my father was watching to see if I'd pass. My phone rang at exactly 8 in the morning. I'd fallen asleep in the leather chair, still wearing my coat, the ground lease documents spread across my chest. The ringing jolted me awake. Brandon's name on the screen. I let it ring twice more before answering. Ariana. His voice was different, softer, almost gentle. Hey, listen. Vanessa and I were talking after you left, and we both feel terrible about how things went down last night. I said nothing. The weather was brutal, he continued. I kept thinking about you out there in that storm. Where did you end up? Are you okay? I'm fine. Good. That's good. A pause. Look, I want to help you. I've been reviewing the paperwork for that factory Dad left you, and Ariana, I'm not going to sugarcoat this. It's a disaster. $400,000 in delinquent property taxes. Multiple code violations. The city's probably going to condemn it by the end of the month. I looked down at the ground lease agreement in my lap. I'm aware of the tax situation, I said carefully. Right, of course. You're an appraiser, you understand these things. His voice shifted into the smooth, persuasive tone he used with clients. Which is why I know you'll appreciate what I'm about to offer. I spoke with my accountant this morning. I'm willing to purchase the factory from you. $75,000. Cash. We can close today. $75,000 for a property that controlled a $340 million building. That's generous, I said, keeping my voice neutral. It's more than generous. It's a lifeline. That factory is bleeding money, and you don't have the resources to stop it. Take the $75,000, find yourself a nice condo in the suburbs. Naperville, Aurora, somewhere with good schools for when you eventually settle down. And I noticed he said when, not if. Like my entire future was already mapped out in his mind. The spinster sister finally getting her life together at 33. I need time to think about it, I said. Silence on the other end, then. How much time? A few days. Ariana, this offer expires at 5 p.m. today. After that, you're on your own. The city will seize the property for unpaid taxes and you'll walk away with nothing. Take the money, please. I'm trying to help you here. I looked around the climate-controlled vault, at the filing cabinets full of my father's secrets, at the brass reading lamp still glowing on the desk. I'll call you back by 5, I said, and hung up. My phone immediately buzzed with a text from Vanessa. Take the money, babe. Trust me, you don't want to own property in that neighborhood. I turned my phone face down and opened my laptop. If Brandon was this desperate to buy the factory immediately, he knew something, or suspected something. I needed to understand what he was really afraid of. I pulled up the financing documents for Summit Tower again, read through the commercial mortgage covenants carefully, and there it was. Page 63, the clause that explained everything. Borrower warrants that the ground lease for the subject property shall remain active and valid for a minimum period of 20 years beyond the maturity date of this loan. In the event said ground lease expires or terminates prior to loan maturity, lender reserves the right to declare immediate default and demand full repayment of outstanding principal and accrued interest. The commercial loan had a 30-year term, which meant the ground lease needed to be valid for at least 50 years total. Brandon's loan came due in 2046. My ground lease expired in 6 months. The moment that lease died, the bank would call in the entire $340 million loan. Brandon would have 30 days to pay it back in full, or the bank would foreclose on everything. He was trying to buy my factory for $75,000 to avoid losing $340 million. I pulled out my phone and texted back, "Thanks for the advice. I'm going to hold on to it for now." The response came in seconds. "You're making a huge mistake." Maybe, but it was my mistake to make. Vanessa called 20 minutes later. "Meet me for coffee. 1 hour, the Sinclair on East Oak Street." Not a question. A command. I almost refused, but something told me I needed to see this play out, needed to understand exactly how far they'd go. Fine, 10 o'clock. The Sinclair was the kind of cafe where a cappuccino cost $12 and everyone looked like they'd just stepped out of a magazine. I walked in wearing the same jeans and coat from the night before, my hair unwashed, my eyes red from lack of sleep, every head turned. Vanessa was already seated in a corner booth wearing a cream cashmere coat and enough jewelry to fund a small country. Her hair was perfect, her makeup was flawless. She looked like she'd had 10 hours of sleep and a professional spa treatment. I slid into the booth across from her. She didn't say hello, just reached into her Hermes bag and pulled out a certified bank check, placed it on the marble table between us. $75,000, made out to me. "Sign the quitclaim deed," she said, sliding a legal document across the table. "Take the money. Go live your life." I looked at the check, then at her. Why does Brandon want this factory so badly? He doesn't want it. He's trying to help you. Her smile was practiced. Perfect. Ariana, let's be honest. You look exhausted. You spent the night God knows where, probably in some Fleabag motel. You don't have savings, you don't have prospects. This is your chance to start over with actual capital. And $75,000 isn't much capital. It's enough for a down payment on a small condo, somewhere appropriate. She leaned forward, lowering her voice. Somewhere where you fit in. Not here. Not in this zip code. You don't belong in luxury high-rises and penthouse towers. That's not your world. I felt something cold settle in my chest. What happens in 6 months, Vanessa? Her perfectly made-up face twitched, just for a second. What are you talking about? The ground lease on lot 402. It expires soon. Does Brandon know? The color drained from her face. Then, just as quickly, she recovered, sat back, crossed her arms. You've been doing research. How cute. Her voice turned sharp. Yes, we know about the lease. That's exactly why we're offering you this money. That factory is the registered headquarters of some defunct LLC your father forgot to dissolve. We need a clean title transfer to update the lease registration. It's a technicality. Boring legal housekeeping. She was lying. I could see it in the way her jaw tensed, the way her fingers drummed against her arm. If it's just housekeeping, why the urgency? Because we have clients, investors, people who need certainty. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a hiss. Take the money. Or I promise you, Ariana, we will make your life hell. We have lawyers. We have connections. We will bury you in legal fees and injunctions until you're begging us to take that factory off your hands. I picked up the check, looked at it, $75,000. Then I tore it in half. Vanessa's mouth fell open. I stood up, dropped the torn pieces on the table, and walked out. Behind me, I heard her slam her hand down so hard the coffee cups rattled. 24 hours later, I got an email from the Chicago Department of Buildings. Subject: Emergency Demolition Order. Property 14-28-402-019. My stomach dropped. I opened the attachment. Official city letterhead. Signed by a senior inspector named Kyle Davis. Upon inspection conducted on February 18, 2025, the structure located at 1847 South Industrial Boulevard has been determined to pose an immediate and severe threat to public safety. The building exhibits Class A structural hazards including compromised load-bearing walls, failing foundation, and imminent risk of collapse. Property owner is hereby ordered to vacate premises immediately. Demolition shall commence within 48 hours unless owner provides proof of remediation contract with licensed structural engineering firm. 48 hours. I read it again, then a third time. This was impossible. No inspector had been to the factory. I'd been there 12 hours ago, taking detailed measurements. The foundation was over-engineered to absurd specifications. There was no structural danger. This was fake. I grabbed my laser measurement tool, my camera, and the structural load manual I kept in my car and drove straight to the factory. A Chicago Department of Buildings truck was parked outside, amber lights flashing. A man in a high-visibility jacket was wrapping yellow caution tape around the chain-link fence. I got out of my car, walked straight up to him. His name tag read, K. Davis. "What do you think you're doing?" I called out. He turned. Mid-40s, fleshy face, the kind of bureaucratic smugness that comes from years of unchallenged authority. "Securing a hazard perimeter, you need to step back behind the street lamp, ma'am." "I'm the property owner." He looked me up and down, unimpressed. "Then you received the demolition order. Building's a death trap. Gonna bring in the wrecking crew tomorrow morning." "On whose authority? You can't condemn a commercial structure based on a visual inspection. Where's your structural engineer's report? Where are the core samples? The stress tests?" He tapped his clipboard. "My signature is all the authority I need. I'm a senior city inspector. If I say it's coming down, it's coming down." I pulled out my laser measurement tool. "Then you won't mind if I document the foundation specifications before you demolish it." His eyes narrowed. "You can't go in there. It's unsafe." "I'm a licensed commercial property appraiser for the state of Illinois. I have legal right to assess any property I own." I walked past him toward the fence. "Hey, stop!" I ignored him, slipped through the gap in the chain link, went straight to the nearest foundation column, aimed my laser at the base, began taking measurements. Davis was yelling something about liability, about calling the police. I documented everything: the diameter of the rebar, the density of the concrete, the load-bearing capacity calculations. When I was done, I turned to face him. This foundation supports 4,000 pounds per square foot. It's rated for a 50-story high-rise. There is no structural danger. Your demolition order is fraudulent. His face went red. You don't know what you're talking about. I'm going to the Department of Buildings right now. I'm going to show Director Reynolds your order, and then I'm going to show him my engineering data. And then I'm going to ask him why a senior inspector would file a fraudulent emergency order. Davis pulled out his phone, started typing frantically. I saw the screen for just a second as I walked past. Message to Van. She's not backing down. What do I do? Van. Vanessa. I walked into the Chicago Department of Buildings 40 minutes later, bypassed reception, went straight to the senior zoning division, pushed open the glass doors, and found Kyle Davis standing at the desk of Director William Reynolds handing over his clipboard. They both turned when I walked in. What is the meaning of this? Reynolds demanded. He was older, silver hair, the kind of man who'd spent 40 years in municipal bureaucracy and had seen every scam in the book. Ask him, I said, pointing at Davis. Ask him where his structural engineer's report is for property 14-28-402-019. Davis's face went pale. I walked up to the desk, pulled out my measurement logs, and spread them across Reynolds' workspace. My name is Ariana Hudson. I'm a licensed commercial property appraiser. This man issued an emergency demolition order on my factory claiming imminent structural collapse. But I measured the foundation myself. The concrete footings extend 40 feet into bedrock. The rebar density is rated to support live loads exceeding 4,000 pounds per square foot. This foundation was over-engineered to anchor a skyscraper. Reynolds picked up my logs, studied them, then looked at Davis. Where are your core samples, Davis? Sir, the visual deterioration was severe enough that visual deterioration doesn't override state engineering codes. You need core samples. You need a signed affidavit from an independent structural firm. You need a minimum 3-month warning period for Class S foundations. Reynolds' voice was getting louder. Did you even read the engineering classification for this property before you issued this order? Davis stammered. The building looked dangerous. I made an executive... Reynolds ripped the demolition order in half. You're suspended pending internal review. Badge. Now. Davis's hands were shaking as he unclipped his city badge and placed it on the desk. As he turned to leave, his phone buzzed. He pulled it out, read something, and his face went completely white. Reynolds pointed toward his office. Wait in there. Don't touch anything. When Davis was gone, Reynolds turned to me. Ms. Hudson, I apologize. This is highly irregular. Can I ask, do you know why someone would want your property demolished? I looked at him, decided to take a risk. Director Reynolds, can you pull up the ground lease registration for Lot 402? He frowned, but turned to his computer. Typed, waited. Here it is. Hudson Ground Holdings, LLC. Current lease term expires June 15th, 2025. He looked up. That's only 6 months away. Now, pull up what's built on Lot 402. More typing. Then his eyes widened. Summit Tower, 50 stories, $340 million assessed value. He looked at me. Does the tower owner know about this expiration? He's my brother, I said quietly. And yes, he knows. Reynolds sat back in his chair. Ms. Hudson, you should probably get a very good lawyer. I will, but first I need you to do something for me. What's that? When that inspector's phone records come back during your internal review, I need you to check who he's been texting. Reynolds studied me for a long moment. Then he nodded. I'll make sure it's thorough. I walked out of City Hall, my hands shaking with adrenaline. My phone rang. Brandon, I answered. You bitch, he hissed. No more fake concern. No more smooth hedge fund manager voice. You got Davis suspended. Do you have any idea what you've done? I stopped someone from illegally demolishing my property. That property is worthless. I'm trying to help you. By destroying evidence? By paying off a city inspector? Silence. Then, you have no proof of that. Davis's phone records will show he's been texting Vanessa. The internal review will find bank transfers. You're not as careful as you think you are, Brandon. I heard him breathing hard on the other end. This isn't over, Ariana. No, I agreed. It's just getting started. I hung up, and for the first time in 6 months, I smiled. I hired a private investigator the next morning. His name was Robert Chen, former FBI white-collar crime division, now running a boutique forensic accounting firm in the Loop. I met him in his office, a cramped space above a Thai restaurant, nothing like the glass towers where Brandon did business. I need everything you can find on Summit Ridge Capital's acquisition of Summit Tower, I said, sliding a retainer check across his desk. Financing documents, due diligence reports, email correspondence, everything. Chen studied me with sharp eyes. Your brother owns Summit Ridge. I know. You're investigating your own brother? I'm protecting myself. He took the check. Give me 3 days. He called me back in 2. You need to see this in person, he said. I met him at a coffee shop in Pilsen, far from downtown, far from anywhere Brandon's network might notice us. Chen slid a thick manila envelope across the table. Summit Ridge Capital purchased the tower in June 2016 for $340 million, he began. Leveraged buyout, complex financing structure. But what's interesting is the due diligence report. He pulled out a document. A memo dated April 2016 stamped confidential, acquisition team eyes only. I read the highlighted section. Ground lease consideration. Property sits on lot 402, subject to 99-year ground lease expiring June 15, 2025, 9 years post-acquisition. Ground lease currently held by Hudson Ground Holdings, LLC, registered to Trenton Hudson, buyer's father. Recommend early renewal negotiation to secure favorable terms. Family relationship may provide leverage for below-market renewal rate or possible lease buyout. My hands started shaking. He knew, I whispered. From the beginning, he knew. It gets better, Chen said. Look at the financing covenants. He showed me another document, the commercial mortgage agreement. Page 63, the clause requiring the ground lease to remain valid for 20 years beyond loan maturity. Your brother's loan officers would have flagged this immediately, Chen said. There's no way the bank approved a $340 million loan on a property with a ground lease expiring in 9 years, not without explicit assurances. What kind of assurances? Chen pulled out another document, an email chain from May 2016. From Brandon Hudson, James Morrison, Senior VP, Chicago Commercial Bank. Summit Tower Financing, ground lease clarification. Jim, regarding your concerns about the lot 402 ground lease expiration, I can confirm that my family controls the ground lease entity. My father has verbally agreed to renewal terms favorable to Summit Ridge Capital upon expiration. This is an internal family matter that will be resolved prior to the 2025 maturity date. I will provide written confirmation from my father's attorney by end of quarter. I looked up at Chen. Did he provide it? There's no record of any written confirmation, but the bank approved the loan anyway, probably because they trusted the family relationship. I sat back, the pieces falling into place. Brandon had purchased the tower knowing full well he was sitting on an expiring ground lease. He'd gambled everything, his investors' money, the bank's money, his entire reputation, on the assumption that our father would eventually hand over the lease for nothing, or that he'd inherit it when Dad died. He'd never expected it to go to me. There's something else, Chen said quietly. I found records of significant cash transfers from your brother to a law firm, Caldwell and Associates, starting in late 2023. 2023. Right after Mom got her cancer diagnosis. How much? $200,000 over 6 months. My stomach turned. What was he paying them for? Chen met my eyes. I don't know, but that's a lot of money for routine legal work. I went to the storage unit that afternoon. After Mom died, we'd boxed up her personal belongings, clothes, jewelry, books, photo albums. Things too painful to look at, but too precious to throw away. Brandon had rented a climate-controlled unit and told me I could sort through it whenever I was ready. I'd avoided it for months. Now I drove straight there, my hands gripping the steering wheel too tight. The unit was exactly as we'd left it. Cardboard boxes stacked neatly, labeled in Brandon's precise handwriting. Clothing, jewelry, books, Photos. I opened the box labeled personal items. Inside, Mom's reading glasses, her favorite scarf, a small wooden box full of costume jewelry, and a leather-bound journal. I'd never seen it before. Mom wasn't a journal person, or so I'd thought. But there it was, burgundy leather, pages dog-eared and filled with her familiar looping handwriting. I sat down on the concrete floor and opened it. The first entry was dated March 2022. Trenton is being impossible about the factory. Brandon asked him nicely, explained the situation with the ground lease, but Trenton refuses to transfer it, says Brandon needs to earn it. This is absurd. Brandon is our son. That property should be his by right, not locked away in some test. I tried talking to Trenton tonight. He won't listen. My throat tightened. I flipped ahead. June 2023. Brandon is terrified. The lease expires in 2 years and the bank is starting to ask questions. He needs that factory, needs the ground lease renewed, but Trenton won't even discuss it. He keeps saying Ariana deserves to inherit something of value. Ariana! She's a property appraiser, not a developer. What would she even do with it? I have to help my son. September 2023. I made a decision. I contacted Richard Caldwell. He came highly recommended by one of Brandon's golf partners. We're going to draft a new will, one that gives Brandon control of the factory and the LLC. Trenton doesn't need to know until it's signed. This is for Brandon's future. November 2023. Trenton found out about Caldwell. Someone at the club must have mentioned it. He was furious, called me a traitor, said I was helping Brandon steal from Ariana. But Ariana doesn't need a factory. She needs a normal life, a husband, children, not some complicated real estate empire. I'm doing this for both of them. The handwriting got shakier in the later entries. January 2024. The cancer is everywhere. Pancreas, liver, lymph nodes. The doctors give me 6 months. Trenton still refuses to sign the new will. We had the worst fight of our marriage last night. He said if I died before him, he'd make sure Brandon never got that property. Said it was his final test of character. I don't understand him anymore. February 2024, 2 weeks before her death. I'm so tired. Too tired to fight. Brandon visited today. Promised me he'd take care of the factory situation himself after I'm gone. He said he has a plan. I trust him. He's always been so smart, so capable. Everything will work out. I just need to rest now. That was the last entry. I closed the journal, tears streaming down my face. Mom had chosen Brandon. Even knowing he was trying to cheat me out of my inheritance, she'd chosen him. And whatever plan Brandon had promised her, it had led to fake demolition orders and $75,000 bribes. My phone buzzed. An email from the Cook County Probate Court. Notice of Emergency Conservatorship. Petition. Ariana Elizabeth Hudson. I opened the attachment. Brandon was petitioning the court to have me declared legally incompetent. The petition claimed I was suffering from severe mental instability, evidenced by erratic behavior, paranoid delusions, and inability to manage personal affairs. As evidence, Brandon had submitted my grief counseling records from 2019, when I'd been so overwhelmed caring for our dying parents that I'd finally sought help. He twisted every session into proof of insanity. The court had scheduled a mandatory deposition at Caldwell and Associates. If I didn't appear, Brandon would win by default. I walked into that glass conference room 3 days later. Brandon and Vanessa sat on one side of the massive table, flanked by Caldwell and 2 other attorneys. A court videographer adjusted his camera, pointing it directly at the single chair across from them. I sat down alone. No lawyer, no backup, just me and the truth. Caldwell started the recording. Ms. Hudson, let's discuss your current living situation. Is it true that you're unemployed, essentially homeless, and squatting in a condemned industrial building? I looked directly into the camera. I'm self-employed as a licensed commercial property appraiser. I'm not squatting. I'm occupying a legally deeded property that I own free and clear. The building was never condemned. The fraudulent demolition order was revoked by the Department of Buildings after I provided engineering data proving structural integrity. Caldwell's jaw tightened. He slammed down a medical file. Let's talk about your grip on reality. You underwent intensive therapy in 2019. You told your counselor you felt detached from reality and incapable of managing basic tasks. Does that sound like someone who should control a multi-million-dollar commercial asset? I sought grief counseling after spending 5 years as the sole caregiver for 2 terminally ill parents, I said evenly. My diagnosis was caregiver burnout. a normal physiological response to chronic stress. Recognizing my limits and seeking professional help demonstrates mental clarity, not the lack of it. I leaned forward. Furthermore, if we're discussing competency, 48 hours ago, I used commercial-grade laser measurement tools to calculate load-bearing capacity and presented engineering data to the Chicago Director of Buildings. He agreed with my assessment and suspended the inspector who filed the fraudulent demolition order. That's not delusional behavior. That's professional expertise. The room went quiet. Caldwell shuffled his papers, looking for another angle. I decided to go on offense. Mr. Caldwell, for the record, did you help Melissa Hudson attempt to alter Trenton Hudson's will in 2024 without his knowledge or consent? His face went white. That's privileged. I have her journal. I have dated entries describing your meetings. I have bank records showing my brother paid you $200,000 between September 2023 and February 2024. I pulled out the documents Chen had given me. You conspired with my mother and brother to disinherit me while my father was still alive. That's fraud, Mr. Caldwell. Caldwell stood up. This deposition is over. He grabbed the camera, stopped the recording. Brandon lunged across the table. You have no right. I have every right, I said calmly. And tomorrow, I'm filing a complaint with the Illinois State Bar. Enjoy your law license while you still have it. I walked out. Behind me, I heard Vanessa's voice, shrill and panicked. She's going to ruin us. She's going to ruin everything. Good. The emergency HOA meeting was scheduled for the following week. Brandon had sent a building-wide email. Important update regarding title clarification. Attendance mandatory. And he was planning to announce that the minor title dispute with his unstable sister had been resolved, that I'd be signing the quitclaim deed, that everyone's investments were safe. I decided to crash the party. The conference room on the 50th floor was packed. Wealthy condo owners, tech executives, a foreign diplomat, and 3 men in navy suits sitting near the front. The senior vice presidents from Chicago Commercial Bank. Brandon stood at the head of the table in a charcoal suit, projecting confidence. Vanessa sat beside him in a crimson dress, diamonds glittering. I walked in wearing my best professional outfit, still nothing compared to their designer clothes, but respectable. I carried my briefcase and a laptop. Every head turned. Brandon's face went pale. Ariana, he said carefully, this is a private meeting. For residents and stakeholders of Summit Tower, I replied. I'm a stakeholder. I walked to the front of the room, set down my briefcase, and plugged my laptop into the presentation screen. What are you doing? Vanessa hissed. I ignored her, pulled up the Cook County property database. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Ariana Hudson. I'm a commercial property appraiser and the owner of Hudson Ground Holdings, LLC. I'm here to clarify the title situation my brother mentioned in his email. I clicked. The screen filled with an official county record. This is Lot 402, the parcel of land directly beneath this building. It's subject to a 99-year ground lease that expires on June 15th of this year. That's 4 months from now. Murmurs spread through the room. My brother purchased this tower in 2016, knowing full well about the lease expiration. His own due diligence memo, which I'm now displaying, recommended early renewal negotiation because the lease was held by our father. I clicked again. The 2016 memo appeared on screen. Brandon assumed he'd inherit the ground lease, or that our father would renew it for free. He bet $340 million, your investments, on a family handout. One of the bank executives stood up. Mr. Hudson, is this accurate? Brandon opened his mouth, closed it. The lease was always going to be renewed, he finally said. It's a formality. It's not a formality, I interrupted. According to your commercial mortgage covenants, also on screen now, the ground lease must remain valid for 20 years beyond loan maturity. Your loan matures in 2046. That means you need a lease extending to at least 2066. I looked directly at the bankers. The current lease expires in 4 months. There's no renewal in place, which means, gentlemen, your $340 million loan is currently in violation of its own covenants. The moment this lease expires, you can declare immediate default. The room erupted, residents shouting, the bankers conferring in urgent whispers, the diplomat frantically calling his financial advisor. Brandon slammed his fist on the table. She's lying. This is extortion. I'm not lying. I'm clarifying. I pulled out the ground lease agreement. I own the land under this building. If you want to keep your homes, you'll need to negotiate a new lease with me, not my brother, me. The lead banker, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, stood up. Mr. Hudson, you've had 9 years to resolve this. You failed to disclose a material risk to your investors and lenders. As of this moment, Chicago Commercial Bank is freezing all operating accounts associated with Summit Ridge Capital pending emergency review. He looked at me. Ms. Hudson, our legal team will contact you tomorrow regarding lease renewal terms. Then he walked out, his colleagues following. The room descended into chaos, residents demanding refunds, Vanessa in tears, Brandon standing frozen, watching his empire crumble. I packed up my laptop. As I walked past Brandon, he grabbed my arm. You destroyed me, he whispered. Your own brother. I looked him in the eye. No, Brandon, you destroyed yourself the moment you thought Dad's love came with a price tag. I pulled my arm free and left. The federal indictment came 6 weeks later. Securities fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, wire fraud, attempted extortion. The trial was held in the Dirksen Federal Building, courtroom packed with media, defrauded investors, and curious onlookers. I sat in the gallery, watching prosecutors lay out their case. They had everything. The due diligence memo, Mom's journal, Caldwell's emails, Davis's confession about the fake demolition order, bank records showing the $200,000. Brandon's defense was pathetic. My father promised me that property. It was supposed to be mine. My sister manipulated him while he was sick. The prosecutor showed the jury my timesheets from the hospice. Documentation of every 3 a.m. medication dose, every dialysis appointment, every hospital visit. This is the woman the defendant claims was manipulating his father? The prosecutor asked, while he was vacationing in St. Bart's? The jury deliberated for 3 hours, guilty on all counts. The judge scheduled sentencing for 2 weeks later. Brandon was released on bail. Vanessa filed for divorce the same day, her statement citing irreconcilable differences and undisclosed financial fraud. I thought it was over. Then, the morning of sentencing, my phone rang. Robert Chen, you need to get to the courthouse, now. Why? Just trust me, you need to be there. The courtroom was packed again. Brandon sat at the defense table, his lawyer beside him. The judge was reviewing sentencing guidelines. I slipped into the back row. The prosecutor stood to make her final argument when the courtroom doors opened. Everyone turned. A man walked in, tall, silver hair, wearing a navy suit and carrying a leather briefcase. The courtroom went silent. Because the man walking down the aisle was Trenton Hudson, my father, who had died 7 months ago, I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. The entire room seemed to tilt. Brandon shot to his feet. That's impossible. You're dead. I saw. The judge banged his gavel. Order. Who are you, sir? My father walked calmly to the witness stand. Your Honor, my name is Trenton Hudson. I apologize for the disruption, but I have testimony relevant to this case. The prosecutor looked stunned. Your Honor, this man was reported deceased. I faked my death, my father said calmly, with the help of a trusted physician and attorney. I needed to see the truth about my family. The judge leaned forward. Mr. Hudson, do you understand you're under oath? I do. Proceed. My father looked at me. Our eyes met across the courtroom. He gave me the smallest nod. Then he turned to face the jury. 7 months ago, I learned that my wife and son were conspiring to steal from my daughter. I confronted my wife. She admitted everything. The secret meetings with Caldwell, the plan to alter my will, all of it. When she died, I knew Brandon would escalate. He pulled documents from his briefcase. So I staged my death. I had a physician friend falsify a death certificate. I attended my own funeral from a car across the street, and then I watched. He looked at Brandon. I watched you throw your sister into a snowstorm. I watched you try to buy her property for a fraction of its value. I watched you pay a city inspector to destroy evidence, and I recorded all of it. He handed a flash drive to the prosecutor. This contains audio and video from hidden cameras I installed in the factory vault. Conversations between Brandon and Vanessa discussing their plan to force Ariana to sign. Meetings between Brandon and Caldwell planning the conservatorship petition. Everything. The courtroom erupted. Brandon was on his feet screaming, "You let me think you were dead! You let Mom die thinking—" Your mother knew, my father said quietly. I told her what I planned to do. She begged me not to. She said it would destroy you. I told her you needed to be tested, to see if you valued family or money more. He looked back at me. Ariana passed the test. She used her mind, her training, her integrity. You, Brandon, used greed, corruption, and betrayal. The judge banged his gavel repeatedly, trying to restore order. I sat in the back row, tears streaming down my face, unable to process what I was seeing. My father, alive, watching over me the entire time. The judge sentenced Brandon to 12 years in federal prison. Caldwell was disbarred and indicted separately for fraud. Kyle Davis pleaded guilty to accepting bribes and received 3 years probation. Vanessa lost her real estate license and declared bankruptcy when Brandon's assets were seized. And I sat in the courtroom, watching my brother being led away in handcuffs and felt nothing but exhaustion. 6 months later, I stood in the penthouse. My penthouse now. I'd negotiated new ground lease terms with the Homeowners Association, $25 million per year paid to Hudson Ground Holdings, LLC. The bank had restructured their loan. The residents had stayed. Brandon's unit, though, the $12 million penthouse, had been foreclosed and sold to pay his legal fees and restitution. I'd bought it myself, turned it into the headquarters of Hudson Commercial Group. The factory on the south side was under construction. We were converting it into a community center and tech incubator using that over-engineered foundation to build something that would actually help people. My father lived in the vault beneath it. He'd never liked luxury anyway. We'd reconciled slowly. There were still hard conversations ahead. About the pain of thinking he was dead, about the test he'd put me through. But he'd been right about one thing. I'd needed to prove myself without his help. The intercom buzzed. "Ms. Hudson, there's a visitor. Says it's personal." "Send them up." The elevator doors opened. Brandon. He looked smaller in his prison jumpsuit, thinner, the arrogance completely gone. "They let you out?" I asked. "Work release program. Good behavior." He looked around the penthouse. "This used to be mine. It was never yours. It was built on borrowed land." He nodded, looked down at his hands. "I came to apologize." I said nothing. "You were right about all of it. I thought the building was what mattered. The height, the view, the status." He met my eyes. "I forgot about the foundation. Forgot what Dad tried to teach us." "He taught you," I said. "You just didn't want to listen." "I know." He paused. "Can you ever forgive me?" I looked at my brother, the man who'd thrown me into a blizzard, who'd tried to steal my inheritance, who'd conspired with our mother against our father. "Maybe someday," I said, "but not today." He nodded. "That's fair." The guard at the elevator gestured. Time was up. Brandon walked back to the elevator, shoulders slumped. Before the doors closed, he turned back. "For what it's worth, Ari, I'm proud of what you built." The doors slid shut. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over Chicago. My phone buzzed, a text from my father. "Dinner tonight? I want to hear about the community center plans." I smiled. "See you at 7, I typed back. People always ask me what it felt like to destroy my own brother's empire. I tell them the truth. I didn't destroy Brandon. He destroyed himself the day he decided a 50-story tower was more important than the ground beneath it. My father taught me a lesson when I was 10 years old, sitting at his desk studying property blueprints. He said, "Ariana, anyone can buy the sky, but only the smart ones know to hold the ground." My brother forgot that lesson. I built an empire from it, because real power doesn't come from the highest floor or the best view. It comes from owning the foundation everyone else is standing on. Thank you for staying with me through this story. If it resonated with you, if you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, or told you weren't good enough, please subscribe to this channel. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, the person everyone overlooks today might be the one holding all the cards tomorrow. The foundation always wins. Always.